I wouldn't say so. I mean, I think as every time we're making a film, we're doing some research.
Yeah.
But no, I think you're confusing with something else.
I think he's confusing it with anything. I think you've read reviews and they're full of shit.
Maybe it's
I haven't
wrong
read a
information.
single thing in a review that is in the film. It's amazing. Neither of us has ever said we're not like anthropologists. There's a subdiscipline of anthropology, it's anthropology of cannibalism, but it's not our own.
But I think it's also confusing maybe with the fact that as a French person, I've been very familiar to this cannibal, especially because Sagawa committed his crime in France, and when you're my age, I grew up with this image of like this, Oriental cannibal, who wanted to eat the young lady's flesh. So it's like trigger your imagination. Maybe that's the confusion. No, I didn't have any. We did some research about him, about cannibalism, of course, and we learned a lot while doing some research. But before this very film, I was not, except as an anthropologist, trained as an anthropologist. So you come across some theoretical debate about that, right. But like very superficial. It was not my specialty.
Nothing about it. I think you emailed me from Vienna and told me about it.
Yes.
So I think you'd remembered lots of things that had happened to you, including this, but you weren't imagining working on it. And then some series of circumstances in Japan and Vienna transpired so that I remember you emailing me we should do something with Sagawa-san. That's how it started. And I was supposed to read your emails, and I guess it took me a few weeks, but it vaguely irritated you. But eventually we got around to it, and we were working in Japan anyway, and on something totally different, on the Fukushima crisis, making an artwork and installation about that. And but because we were going there so often and spending so much time there, we got interested in as complete outsiders in Japanese culture in general, including in a genre of film, a kind of sexploitation, softcore porn genre called Pinku Eiga. And then through that we got interested in Issei Sagawa.
No, we wanted to make a musical, so that was the thing. The Pinku Eiga genre is super interesting in itself because it's like 35, there is a whole culture, movie theater that are dedicated to this genre of film that only exists in Japan, and it's a low budget. So we were interested in the genre and also the history and also the fact that it was going to disappear soon. And so we started to do research on Pinku and watching a lot of them, and then it's a very boring, it's interesting in many ways, but I think we were interested in making our own Pinku Eiga. It's a genre that is going to disappear. Why don't we try to make one? With the same criteria, low budget, shot in 35, under 6 days, with at least 3 sex scenes. That's basically that defines the genre. And there is a subgenre of that is musical. And it's very rare that porn and musical are associated. And I found the idea very interesting. And going a little bit further down this line of research, basically we met with one of the, a master of Pinku, let's say, and then we made the connection that he has been working with Sagawa, and he was also a friend of him, one of the few, very, very few friends of this cannibal. And then, of course, he reminded me of this figure when I was a kid, and then the whole thing became just together. That was so we met with several Pinku Eiga director, and we were more interested in one in particular, Sato Isayasu, was maybe the most abject of all. And then we made a deal with him, basically. We say, okay, how about we produce a Pinku that you're going to direct, And while you're doing your film that we are producing, we also make our own pinku. So meaning that no matter what you do, we're going to film in the same time as you, and we can ruin your shot. And that's the first condition. The second condition is you have no limit, and then you just do whatever you want. And the third condition is that let's try to have Issei Sagawa acting in the film so we can meet him.
Or like,
but that's the one.
You had parts in it. Okay. This is it. Yeah. Okay. I was curious
That's
about that
the
too,
pinku.
but I didn't know if that was a true story or not either.
I think we're only in it for 10, 20 seconds or
Do you
something.
worry that people think you are like all naked
Oh no,
and
you're not
running
acting
in
that
the...
way, but yeah, you appear in the film.
We appear. Yeah. We're not like the main
Yeah.
role. We don't have any sex scene in the film. Where's that? No, we usually don't come with preconception when we film. We just wanted to make sure that he knew that compared to all the film that we've seen about him, and there is quite a lot, where he's playing this devil, monster, cannibal, oriental, and he has been acting all his life and making a living out of that. We wanted to make sure that he understood that that was not what we were expecting from him. But it was almost like he's sick. You can see that he's very weak now. He had a stroke. He has diabetes. And so it was a chance to appear in a completely different light. And there was and everything was open with him. It's like we don't expect anything from you in particular, but you can basically represent. You can appear as you want, and also there is this thing that usually all the document that we have seen, or the film we have seen, is people are mostly interested, including actually anthropologists. They're usually interested in the act itself of cannibal, but never on the subjectivity of the desire for flesh. And we were obviously interested in that, but also we were extremely open to anything with him. It was a really we wanted a collaboration where he could invent himself, reinvent himself. He could be just weak and the way he is. He's also a very complex, interesting man. He's very literate. He has a PhD. He's a specialist of Shakespeare and Kawabata, and so we wanted to talk about music and literature. And he could completely invent himself. And it's true that we didn't know either what to expect, and we were ready to completely to go along with what was his desire. It was almost like being a guide or being a companion for how we wanted to be. I'm not sure I'm saying it the right way. I don't want to sound like we were.
I remember it that way. I think we had fond hopes of making a much more collaborative piece and pushing collaboration much further than we had, in different ways than we had in our earlier work. And initially the idea was that he might want even to plan out his death, and we would be present at that and would be participants in it and filming it, recording it in some way. And then we also gave him a camera and hoped that he would be able to film himself, not only when we were there, but also when we weren't there, possibly in a much more confessional register than when we were present. We also tried to get him to draw and to come up with different paintings and drawings that would be meaningful to him and that were a way for him of reflecting on his past. But he was too weak by this point to do that. The combination of the stroke, of the heart attack, and the diabetes. And I don't think everyone obviously has preconceptions, most of which one is oblivious to, but one of our conscious preconceptions was never that we would go there and film in close-up. We didn't have the style per se. Quite soon on we hit on the idea of like a huis clos, like a closed space, and it's tiny, the space. But I think the close-ups, we did also film not in close-ups, and we did also film the apartment, and progressively that stuff just disappeared from the film while we were cutting it. But it wasn't the initial aesthetic, stylistic imposition that decreed everything. And I think that the close-ups are in part a reflection of the fact that even though it was a challenge set by a friend of ours to make our first talking head film, we're interested in ways in which people's faces and people's heads express aspects of their identity and their being and their past in ways that aren't communicable by language. And faces in a way don't lie in the way that we do lie when we speak, in the way that our mouths and our tongues lie. But also he's very laconic, and he speaks in these haikus and these fragments very intermittently, very occasionally. And because he spoke so rarely, so parsimoniously, and because we didn't understand what he was saying when he said it most of the time, he also speaks French and some English. Mostly he was speaking Japanese. We asked now Nakazawa, our translator and collaborator, not to translate. Sometimes he would translate right afterwards. Sometimes we said, please don't translate for a couple of hours. We want a different kind of more corporeal, more somatic engagement with him. And I think the close-ups were in large part a response to that as well. So that the whole frame becomes flesh, and the figural is transformed into a kind of fleshiness that's different from your typical talking head documentary kind of close-up.
Yeah. And also, I think it's also because, as you say, we were not understanding Japanese, that we were, like really eager to really hang on his face and try to understand anything through other than linguistic.
Right.
This is what you just said. Sorry. No. That was a absolutely surprise for us. So we did like every single day was a progression in our the dynamic of the relationship. And at the beginning we were a little bit afraid of June, I have to say, because we were afraid that he was controlling what was going to happen, and I think he completely understood the what I call the deal, like to be free and to get to know each other, and he was there always almost in the shadow of his brother, being behind and being very mysterious. We were wondering what was going on, and very slowly. But it was interesting for us because he was also very attentive to his brother in a way that he was trying to understand, and he really wanted. For him, it was the opportunity to try to understand his brother, and I think he took the opportunity of our presence to really engage with the past and his brother and their relationship, but slowly, and we understood that he didn't know that Issei Sagawa had published a manga in which he's describing his crime in very disturbing detail, and when we mentioned this, because we wanted to make in our discussion, we wanted to make connection between religion and cannibalism, and at some point in the manga there is a drawing of him. I think he's ingesting you say ingesting the clitoris of his victim, and he's talking about communion, and he's actually drawing even like a saint kind of aureole. And so we were triggering all this discussion about religion and cannibalism and Eucharisty and all this, this parallel that there is between cannibalism and spirituality. And June was very surprised, and he said, "But I don't understand what you're talking about." And so we understood that he didn't know about the manga. So we just took out the manga and he is reading it like literally in front of us, and he's discovering. And by the end of that, the whole relationship changed. And he told us that he wanted to invite us to his place, which is like 10 meters away. And when we arrived, we pushed the door, and there was the barbed wire, and there was like a knife all over his bed. And we asked Nao, who was helping us with the sound and also translation, not to translate. So we discovered, without understanding what he was saying, while performing some torture on himself, we didn't know exactly what was going on. And after that, our relationship was, and their relationship, like, continued to evolve, and ours too. And there was a kind of a relief for him, and a trust
just as
in us.
Manga, just as Sagawa-san's, Issei-san's manga was a revelation to his brother, to Jun-san, what Jun's own psychopathology was also a revelation to Issei-san. So it was kind of a sharing between them, which they then contested, in our presence and so on.
Oh.
But I think we were, the sort of antibodies that we generated, to put it harshly, were a kind of catalyst for a much more open kind of relationship, that they would discuss things that they had hidden away before. And also a catalyst for the sort of, initially we thought that the film would really be a portrait of one person, of Issei Sagawa, and it ended up being still that in part, but less a film about cannibalism in any normal way in which we understand the word about, than a portrait of almost classic Shakespearean sibling rivalry and all of the psychic energies involved in their relationship. I think the talks were relentless, were incessant, largely between ourselves, but also with the producer and with now our collaborator at different points. We didn't have any sort of transcendental ethical standards about what is disturbing and what is not disturbing. I think we both started from the presumption that life is disturbing, and the dark sides to our soul are also disturbing, but they're thoroughly real. And if art or cinema or even documentary is unwilling to engage with that which is disturbing, then it's perilously weakened. If all, it would leave a record for the future of a kind of past that was unreal to those who were alive at the time, who knew all the stakes at the time and what came together to make their lives what they were. But yeah, so we did leave a lot on the cutting room floor, on the electronic cutting room ether or whatever it would be. But it wasn't, I think just every day we'd go back and forth in discussing this. And there were things perhaps that we were anesthetized to by seeing them so frequently that when we would show them to others, they would recoil. And we realized that insofar as most people see a film once and only once, just like most people read a novel once and only once, then they were too discomforting in a sense that they would inhibit the people from engaging with the larger themes of the film. So it is still, I think, for some people, a deeply disturbing film to watch. Cannibalism is perhaps the most abject crime in terms of modern moral values. So to be a subject itself is so inflammatory that some people can't even imagine dealing with it. Of course, cannibals are creatures of our own conjuring, so in the realm of fiction and horror and so on, and fantasy, we love making ourselves fearful of them, but when it comes down to the level of real, especially a very sober, matter-of-fact engagement with it, I think it makes it all the more disturbing for some people.
All right, I think that's good, yeah. Great. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
It's hard to believe that we left the most disturbing images
That's what I was
are
curious,
not in the film.
Yeah.
Can you imagine that?